guys, it's Quanna back again for another recap. Hope you guys are doing awesome. All right, so today I'm going to be recapping Queen Charlotte episode 4 entitled Holding the King. I love the title of this episode because it can refer to several individuals in this episode and how they have been trying to kind of keep the king grounded, keep him protected. It could refer to Charlotte. It could refer to Reynolds. And even though we don't really like this person, it in many ways also applies to Princess Augusta. But at the same time, you could look at it as a very negative type of holding, like holding someone captive in the same way that like Dr. Monro is kind of holding the king captive. Parliament is holding the king captive. His mother is holding the king captive. And really all of Britain, he's held captive by these expectations that are on him that have likely led to some of his issues that he's had. So this episode picks up right after Charlotte rescues him from the garden where he was naked and roaming around and raving at the sky. And she and Reynolds are in her room and they are cleaning the king off. And she begins to wonder what has happened to her husband. Now, this episode was one of the only episodes that was not exclusively written by Shonda Rhimes. It was written by a co-writer, Nicholas Nardini, I think is how you say his name. And he's worked with Shonda before on Scandal and Inventing Anna. I actually like that she kind of handed off the reins to this episode to a male writer because it allows us to kind of get maybe a perspective that George would have going through these things and going through these mental breaks, going through these horrific treatments, and at the same time wanting to really protect his wife and not to expose her to the things that he feels are wrong with him. And so it was really nice to get his perspective. And so this episode actually starts by going and taking us back to the beginning where things started. Funny enough, my mom was watching the episode, and even though she'd seen it before, she was like, we didn't see the wedding until episode 4. And I was like, no, Mom, you're seeing it again. We've already seen the wedding. This is just us seeing it from George's perspective. And so the first 11 minutes or so just take us back to the beginning, all the way back to Farmer George working on the land, farming, plowing, wanting to just be immersed in his activities of farming, agriculture, and scientific study. And he doesn't care about getting married. He doesn't want to get married. He wants to be a good king. He wants to give cheaper food production to his people, and he wants to give scientific exploration to them. Those are really the things that he cares about. Certainly painting a much different picture of George than what probably history books have given, but of course, they do take artistic liberties. And then Augusta informs him that they have found a queen. And it is in this moment that he has one of his first breaks in front of other people. Other people get to see that, and she has to quickly dismiss everyone and come up with some excuse for why he's acting this way. And it's gotten to the point now where he can't come back to himself, and they have to call in the doctors to figure out how they can help him. And none of these doctors have been able to help before, and so they hunt down a new doctor, Dr. Monro, who has some new treatments that he wants to try out on the king. And this is going to be the doctor that we see for the remainder of this episode, working with George, the doctor that we've seen glimpses of here and there. And he definitely has some outrageous and archaic methods to try and bring George back to himself. We follow through all of the preparations of him meeting Charlotte to the moment that they have their meet cute in the garden. And I love that he finds out he actually knew that she was trying to run off, and so he's like, well, if she's running off, I'm gonna run off too. And unfortunately, in that moment, one of the most horrific moments of this episode, and there are quite a few, Dr. Monro slaps the living daylights out of George in order to bring him back to himself. George actually welcomes it at first because it does seemingly work, and he goes off and he manages to find Charlotte in the garden, and they have their meet cute. And I love that moment. It made me want to go back and watch episode 1 again so we could see the extended version of that. But alas, we get to the wedding. I really like the parallels. I might have mentioned it before, but I really didn't notice it until this episode, how well their outfits match, especially given that Charlotte ultimately chose the wedding dress that she wanted to wear. It really shows that they have some things in common, that there's a lot of alignment in their personalities despite their many differences. Um, it then cuts to the dance scene. I'm looking at my notes. And Beyonce's Deja Vu plays, a very appropriate song for this moment because this episode is a deja vu and that we've seen most of these events happen before. So I won't be going through each and everything that we see. As they go on the carriage ride, his shaking returns. This is what triggers him to kind of have that very brash conversation with her where he takes her to Buckingham House and then he begins to leave, and she is expecting them to consummate their marriage and to spend time together on their honeymoon, and he leaves her. And he leaves her because he feels the cracking beginning again, and he needs to go see the doctor so that he can get a more aggressive treatment because he's really worried about being around her in this condition. And that is where the first 11 minutes of this episode ends. We get to see his motivations. And we see that it wasn't George just being mean for the sake of being mean, but he really wanted to protect her. He really respects and appreciates and actually has begun to become infatuated with Charlotte. And so I think it's touching that he wants to do whatever is necessary to protect her from his illness and to keep her safe. And the king tells the doctor to use the most cutting edge experimental methods on him. I mean, guys, and we see him get electrocuted, leeches, acupuncture. They're doing any and everything to break him of his, I don't know if you would call it psychosis, but it feels like a kind of like a psychosis. They refer to it as the terrific method, invoking terror in him to kind of like literally scare, I don't know, the demons out of him or something. I really don't know. But it's astounding what we witness him go through. And then we get to see the parallels of Charlotte's isolation with George being treated in this horrific manner. And for everything that she was put through, especially because she doesn't know any of this and she's really kept ignorant of it, what he is going through is so much worse. But ultimately, we get to see when she makes the decision to join him at Kew and goes to the observatory and sees what he's been doing and kind of puts up that challenge that ultimately does make him want to try a little bit more. He goes to Buckingham House even before she knows it. And we see him talking with Reynolds, him watching her, observing her on her own. And I love those moments because we can kind of see that he is really enraptured with her. And so we get to see the backstory of him giving the Pomeranian to her. The Pomeranian was the dog that the doctor was potentially going to be like testing on, kept in a cage. And so he and Reynolds go and they break the dog out of the cage. And I love this. I love the analogy that this presents, this juxtaposition. The Germans' breeding of dogs, which led to the Pomeranian, and then George setting it free, giving it to Charlotte, and then telling Reynolds basically like this is going to send her the message that like she is setting him free. This show just does it for me all the time. I tell you, it just does it for me. So what she sees as a deformed bunny, he is viewing it as a symbol of what he hopes her love will do for him. And it's so sweet together. And then we get this moment of Reynolds and Brimsley. And as much as I love Reynolds, and Reynolds is really holding things down for the king, like, I'm not going to lie, I did not like the way that he was talking to my boy Brimsley, because Brimsley has really been about protecting Charlotte. And so Brimsley's like, we need to work together to bring them together. You can tell me what's going on. You can trust me. And Reynolds accuses him of trying to be a social climber. Like, shady much? Like, I'm not feeling that. You were just in old dude's bed and now you're accusing him of being a social climber and only wanting to get information just so that he can take your spot. Like, that's not cool. Again, we see how things progress to the point where we get back to the even days and things are going well with them. And ultimately we see Charlotte caressing her stomach and she is pregnant. And this is where kind of the final break begins to happen, because he gets out of bed, he goes and he encounters the doctor, and he basically is telling the doctor, like, Charlotte has done a better job of curing me than you did. I don't think I'm going to be needing your services anymore. And he's like, oh, I'm not here for you. I'm here for the queen because she's pregnant. And the weight of this change, this responsibility, being responsible for another life, it causes him to break yet again. And we know now that that was the trigger that caused him to kind of really spiral in this last instance. The show doesn't say this directly because it moves pretty quickly through these moments, but we go back to Charlotte and Reynolds and Brimsley in the room, and they're cleaning off the king. And at some point, he does come back to himself. He's in bed and he's put back together, and he seems to be centered again, which again just shows time and time again how Charlotte is able to care for him and take care of him and bring him back to himself. But Charlotte is not having it, and she goes to encounter Princess Augusta in one of my favorite scenes of the show. And she really stands up for herself and stands up for the fact that, like, I am falling in love with him. I do care about him, but this wasn't right. Like, you took my rights, my autonomy, my freedom away from me. You left me in this house with this mad king, and then you didn't even make me prepared for what I was dealing with. You just kind of like let me find these things out on my own. Now, we get to hear from Princess Augusta, who I can't stand, but I can, as a mother, kind of understand where she's coming from, because she's had to protect him from the outside world all of his life, even in many ways where she might be also using him to maintain like familial power. At the same time, she's had to protect him. And so in her mind, she's like, no, why would I tell you? You're like a stranger. You need to just figure this out on your own. And now it's your responsibility. You can't escape it. So I would rather have that than have like me tell you, warn you about it, and then you run off or something like that. So it's not right. It's not right. And it's not okay. But I can kind of understand for that day and time, like why she would feel this way. And so in her own way, she was doing what she thought was best to protect the king. But of course, that meant she was not protecting and looking out for Charlotte. And that's always kind of the case, is that like women often have to suffer at the hands of like protecting a man, which is definitely not okay. But at least the show kind of brings it back to the idea that like Charlotte does love him, and now she can make the choice of what she wants to do now that she knows that she wants to stay with him and fight it out, as she demanded of him back in the observatory when she told him to, stay with me, fight for me. Is she going to do that, or is she going to let him go? Unfortunately, George overhears all of this, but it makes him go back to Dr. Monro and start the treatments again, because he wants to be fixed. He wants to be fixed for her. He doesn't want to be a burden to her. And that's kind of where the episode ends off. I love the fact that we did get George's perspective, because it allows us to see that he wasn't mistreating Charlotte just like for the sake of mistreating her. He wasn't playing games with her emotion, but he really was trying to protect her. And because she has to give so much in the relationship to take care of him, it's good to see that even as barbaric as the methods are, that he really was trying to protect her. It puts their relationship and their love on a more like equal playing field, because even though it's gonna require more from her, his motivations are for her, if you get what I'm saying. That's how kind of I read into it. And that was episode 4. A good episode. I mean, I definitely think that they didn't have to give us this episode, but it was really good because we get those extra layers that develop their romance even more. And like I said, I definitely would not want them to take this episode out, because 6 episodes really doesn't even feel like enough for how good the chemistry is between these two people and how good the show is so far. But let me know down below in the comments what your favorite moment was from episode 4 of Bridgerton. And did you notice any like hidden little things? Because we got to see the episode from his perspective. What was your favorite thing that we saw that wasn't revealed in the first 3 episodes? And we only have 2 episodes left, so I will see you guys in episode 5. Toodles!